Okay, Shalom Aleichem. Welcome, Arya. Welcome, Joachim. Um, this is the third and last of a series on the Haleviim. We'll be speaking about Shirat Haleviim, the song of the Haleviim, and today we'll be addressing the topic of Ikar Shira Bakli or Ikar Shira Bepeh. Do we say that the main Shirat Haleviim is the Leviim's singing, their song, or do we say that it's their instrumental? It's the instrumental music. Now, our source is in a long article by Rav Soloveitchik. Was actually a write-up of one of his Yurtzeit Shiurim in the second volume of Shiurim Lezecher Avi Mari Zatzal, which were the Shiurim that were in memory of his father. So he has a chapter there, Tkiya V'Shira B'Mikdash, and we'll be relating to about 10 pages in the middle of a very long article. So without further ado, the Gemara has a machlokas in Sukkah Daf Nun. The Gemara has the same machlokas in Erchin, and it's connected to that Mishnah in Sukkah that says, yes, the recording is on. I'll just double check. Yeah, recording is on. So it's relating to there's a Mishnah in Sukkah that says Achalil chamisha v'shisha zeu chalil shel beit hashoeva she'eino doche lo et Shabbat v'lo et Yom Tov. The flute, we'll call it the flute, is either 5 or 6 days, and this refers to the flute of Beit HaShoeva, which doesn't docha Shabbos or Yom Tov, so it's either 5 or 6 days, depending on whether Yom Tov comes out on Shabbos or not. And that music was not done on Shabbos or Yom Tov. And the Gemara brings a machloket about this topic, and in the context of that machloket, the Gemara brings this big issue of, and suggests that perhaps a machlokas tanoim. There's a machlokas tanoim about Ikar Shira Bakli or Ikar Shira Bapeh. Once again, whether the main Shiras Haleviim is their song or the instrumental music. Now, there are 3 different issues that are presented that might be dependent on this. One is if Ikar Shira Bakli, so then we have an example of a Kli Sharet, one of the vessels used in the Beit HaMikdash, that is made out of wood. Abuvo Shel Moshe, this wood instrument, which was found to be of the highest quality when it's played by wood, and they tried for a while to do it with metal. It didn't work. It reduced the quality. If Ikar Shira Bakli, so then the musical instruments of the Beit HaMikdash are Klei Sharet, they're vessels of service of the Beit HaMikdash, and then you can make a vessel. You see, of a model of a vessel made from wood. Otherwise, no. A second nafkamin, a second practical ramification of Ikar Shira Bakli or Ikar Shira Bapeh is what the Mishnah speaks about. That was one of the suggestions, that if Ikar Shira Bakli, so then the music, the kelim, is docha Shabbos, and the third is who can play the instruments. If you say that the Ikar Shira is Bakli, if you say that the main Shiras Haleviim is with instruments, so the musicians must be Levim. On the other hand, if you say Ikar Shira Bapeh, the main thing is the Levim song and the music is accompaniment, well then that music can be made by non-Levim, that can be made by people who are Yisraelim. Now, when the dust settles on this topic, the Rambam paskins in a way that seems contradictory, seems inconsistent. On the one hand, as we saw last week, the Rambam very clearly when we were talking about last week we were talking about the sources of Shirat Haleviim, and one of the sources was V'sheres b'shem Hashem Elokav, that the Levi will serve in the name of Hashem, and that clearly is verbal, and so that seemed to be consistent with the Rambam's approach that he's explicit about, which is Iker Shira Bakli. The Rambam writes, Ein polchsim mishnei masar levim omdim al duchan b'chol yom lomar shira lekorban mosifim ad leolam. There are 12 levim. There must be at least 12 levim that are standing there on the platform, saying shira over the korban, and you can add to them. Ve'en omrim shira lebapeh below kli. The shira is done with the mouth through singing, without a utensil, without musical instruments. She'ikar ashira shehi avodata bapeh. The main shira, which is its avoda, is with the mouth. And then it says, there were others there who were playing musical instruments, mehen levim, u'mehen yisraelim yuchasim. Some of them were levim, and some of them were Israelites with a great pedigree. And those people who were musicians, they don't count to the 12. In other words, you have to have at least 12 singers, and then the musicians, but the musicians aren't counted towards that. So the Rambam clearly holds Iker Shira B'Kli, and he clearly holds the nafkamina, the practical ramification, that those musicians don't have to be Levim. On the other hand, when it comes to the Shabbos, so the Rambam seems contradictory. The Rambam says in Halacha Vav that, we'll just have the quote right here, V'chalil shel korban avoda hi v'dochas haShabbos. The flute of the korban is avoda, is service, and it pushes aside Shabbos. Whoa, wait a second, that seems to be contradictory, because the way we understood from the Gemara that if you hold that Iker Shira Bapeh, so you should say that the musical instruments aren't Docha Shabbos. Yet the Rambam seems to be saying on the one hand Iker Shira Bapeh, on the other hand that the musical instruments are Docha Shabbos. That's our problem. Okay, how is he going to solve this problem? So there's going to be two different hanachot, two different basic assumptions, and through those basic assumptions, we'll be able to solve the problem. Okay. Number one, basic assumption number one. Look at the language of the Gemara. Ikar Shira Bapeh or Ikar Shira Bakli. Why not say it in a different way? Shira Bapeh deoraisa or Shira Bakli deoraisa? Why not say, this? I'm not paraphrasing Rav Soloveitchik, but Rav Soloveitchik points out that it's clear from the sources that there was, and it's clear from the Rambam, that there was both music and song. And no one seems to question that. If you look at the Gemara's question is Ikar Shira Bakli or Ikar Shira Bapeh. Both exist. Which one is the main one? It's not which one is the biblical one and the other one is rabbinic, but which one is the main one, though both exist even on a biblical level. So that's point number one. That's an interesting point. Now, if that's the case, so then the machloket in the Gemara is, what essentially is Shirat Haleviim? Is Shirat Haleviim essentially song? And then it's song with musical accompaniment, as the Gemara says, livisume kala. It's just there to I said just. It's there to accompany the um, the song, or do we say exactly the opposite? That essentially there was music going on at the time of the korbanos, at the time of the libations of the wine, but uh, that music was sung, was also sung to. So, but the main part was the music. So now, um, let's see, according to the Rambam's approach then. According to the Rambam's approach, Ikar Shira Bapeh. Well, then it comes out that the music which was accompanying that song was not a hitter mitzvah, but rather it was a complement to the mitzvah. Let's see it inside. Zeu perisha bitui bisume kala. When the Gemara uses that expression that the music was bisume kala, hu'enu mityaches lehidur mitzvah greda. It is not merely greda is not merely a hidur mitzvah, beautification of the mitzvah. That the song of Haleviim is very nice, but it's even more beautiful when there's musical accompaniment. The musical instruments, the music made by musical instruments is joining up with the verbal song itself. Complete shira is with peh and kli. Katuv b'mikra, like the pasuk that the Gemara quotes is Le'ashmiya kol echad lehalelu adot laHashem ukearim kol b'chatzotzrot u'mitziltaim u'b'kli shir v'halel laHashem kitov li'olam chasto. You see within the pasuk it's combining both song lehalelu adot laHashem laharim kol, but b'chatzotzrot mitziltaim u'b'kli shir, the trumpets, the cymbals, and musical instruments. Uvahalel. So uvahalel Hashem, and praising once again, praising Hashem, kitov ki l'olam chasto. So this is not a beautification of the mitzvah of Shira, but it is a completion of the mitzvah of Shira. That's point number one. Now, if that's the case, let's have a look at this issue of Ikar Shira b'peh, Ikar Shira b'kli. So apparently a Levi is necessary for the main aspect of Shira. Now, the question is, why is that? And the more that we make it clear that the musical accompaniment is part and parcel of the mitzvah of Shira, it becomes more and more difficult. The what we mentioned before. Why should it be that an Israelite should be okay and not a Levi? The more you see the musical accompaniment as an essential part of the Shira, so it should be a little more surprising that a Yisrael is okay. And yet, as we said, that's not the case. Let's just read in Rav Soloveitchik's own words. Again, once again, this is Rav Yosef Soloveitchik in the Yurtzeit Shiurim that he gave in memory of his father, and is printed in Shiurim Lezecher Abi Mori Zal, Volume Bet. Bimkein lamati afka'at zar me'avodat Levi tluya be'ikuv, lama lo yipaslu Yisrael gam lenigun b'kli shir. Why should we say that a non-Levi is only relevant for the peh. Why shouldn't they be invalid for the kli shir? So he says as follows. Now here comes the second assumption. First assumption was that both are essential, but one is the main one is a secondary one, complementary one. But the second is the key to his solution, and that is that the concept of being a zar. Now, zar in modern Hebrew we use as a foreigner. In halachic language, vis-a-vis the Beit HaMikdash, it's somebody who is foreign to something that's going on in the Beit HaMikdash, and therefore invalid to do it. Now, the Rav Soloveitchik develops the concept, and then he shows how it's in the words of the Rambam, and then he shows how it's in the words of the Ritva. The idea is as follows: what makes somebody a zar, a foreigner in quotation marks, who would be invalid for avodas hakahuna, for those things of service in the Beis HaMikdash that are done by the Kohanim, the priests? Answer: you look at the avodos of the Kohanim, and any of those avodos, any of those services, whether it's receiving the blood from the korban, pouring it on the altar, burning the sacrifices, offering the incense, whatever it is, whether it is a main or a secondary item, a non-Kohen is going to be invalid. And of course, we know that shchita is kshera bazar, that the slaughtering of the animal itself is permitted by a non-Kohen. But from Kabbalah Eila, from receiving the blood and on, that's where the avodas begin. Okay. What about a Levi? Soloveitchik suggests the following, and it seems to be well based in the words. And that is, the way things work with Haleviim is that a Levi is appointed for a task, and anybody who is not appointed for a task is considered a zar to that task. So now you have something that appears with Haleviim that doesn't appear with Kohanim. The Haleviim were divided up into those who watch the gates and those who sang. And the halacha is that a singer can't watch the gates and a gatekeeper can't sing. We don't find that kind of specificity in avoda with regards to the Kohanim. It's true that there were times when the Kohanim, there would be a number of Kohanim, and the question would be who would do a particular task. Like they would have a pious, they would do a lottery, who was going to do the incense in the mornings. Who was going to do Trumas Hadesh, and who was going to be take off the ashes. But that almost proves the point that many Kohanim were open to it, and just whoever won. But we don't find that a Kohen who does another Kohen's job, again, the Kohen Gadol is a different world, but a Kohen who does another Kohen's job has somehow transgressed. We do find that by a Levi. Says Rav Soloveitchik, Zarus, the concept of being a foreigner, a prohibited to do something foreigner, for a Levi is if you're not appointed for that task, you're a foreigner. So a non-Levi, an Israelite, singing, watching the gates, he wasn't appointed for those tasks, and therefore he's a zar. But even a Levi who is appointed to be a sho'er, who is supposed to be watching the gates, if he sings, he's a zar. Why? Because the definition of a zar is somebody who wasn't appointed for that task. Now, you look at the different way, he says, how the Rambam presents Levim and how he presents Kohanim. Zera Levi kula muvdal avodas hamikdash shenemar ba'isa hi evdil Hashem eshevet halevi. That the descendants of Levi are all set off for serving in the mikdash in the sanctuary. For it says at that time Hashem set off the tribe of Levi. There's a positive mitzvah for them to be open to and prepared for service in the Beis HaMikdash, bein ratzu bein shelo ratzu, whether they want to or not. Shenemar ve'avad halevi hu es avodas oel moed. He will serve the service in the tent of meeting in the oel moed. Ben Levi shekibel olav kol mitzvahs levi achutz midavar achad. A Ben Levi who accepted all mitzvahs of being a Levi except for one. And he gives an example. Let's say he says, I only want to be a Levi, I only want to do Shirat on the Mikdash. So he's invalid. We don't accept him to serve as a Levi until he accepts to do whatever they tell him to do. Avodah shalem hu shiyu shomrim es hamikdash v'yumeim shoarim liftoch sha'arei mikdash u'la'agif lo tosa v'yumeim shoarim l'shor ala korban b'chol yom. Sounds from the Rambam that everybody does shmira, everybody watches, but there's some that are going to be opening and closing the gates, and there's some who are going to be singing, and they're set off, they're appointed. Now, and somebody again who does somebody else's is invalid. What about the Kohanim? HaKohanim huvdelu michlal Levim. They were separated out from the Levim. Lavodas HaKorbanos, to the service of the Korbanos. Shenemar vayavdelo sana Aaron lakdisho, vayavdel Aaron lakdisho kodesh kodeshim. I think it's vayavdel. Might be vayibadel. I don't know. Umitzvah sasehu lahavdil HaKohanim lekadsham lahachinam lekorban. Shenemar bekidashto ki es lechem elokecha umakriv. And there's a positive mitzvah to set them off and to give them, to affirm their sanctity. B'kidashto. V'tzorach kol echad b'Yisrael linhog b'hem kavod harbei lakdim osam l'chol davar shkibidusha. They were given precedence. Now, the explanation he says is kidin avdalim yuchad nemar b'Levim. There's a special law of the Levim being separated. They have to be appointed for an avoda. Every Levi is appointed, set off for some avoda. One like a sho'er, one like a mishorer. And the person has to accept on himself his task. And as we said, if he wants to be appointed to be a Meshorah and not a Shoer, we don't appoint him at all. And once again, and here's where he says it openly. That need for the preparation and the appointment of the Levi, hu hayotzer shem zarut benogel la'avodat Haleviim. That's what creates that category of zarut, of somebody who's an invalid foreigner. V'lo mishal eno Levi hu mugdar kezar bat choser minui. It's not only somebody who's not a Levi, but even somebody who's a Levi, but he's appointed for somebody else. There's no such thing by Kohanim of dividing up the tasks of kahuna and having a Kohen who is earmarked as having a particular task. And the fact that somebody's a zar, it's because that avoda is an avoda for Kohanim and not an avoda for non-Kohanim. Now, here comes the plug-in. לכן נראה כי כיוון ששם זרות בעבודת לוי מתחדש על ידי מינויו והבדלתו לאחת מן העבודות ואינו מושתת על גופה של העבודה עצמה, since the way Zarus, since the way a non, the concept of a Zar by Levi works through appointment and being setting off for an avoda, and it's not that the avoda itself creates the zarut like it is by Kohanim. By Kohanim, Kabbalah Saddam, that's an avoda of Kohanim. Anybody else who's not a Kohen is a zar. But by Haleviim, you always look on, were you appointed for it or not appointed for it? Well, if that's the case, he says, that separation, that setting off, that appointment only applies to avoda, to service, that obligates the person, kegon shira bapeh. If you say ikar shira bapeh, that's his function. That's what applies to the person. It's not an act, but a person-oriented halacha. ולא לפעולה שאינה מחייבת בתורה עצמה, כדבר תפל המחייב אחר. כמו שירה בכלי שבא רק לביסום הכל על השלמת חפצה של שירה בפה. The avoda of serving in the Beis Hamikdash through playing music, that's not something that an appointment applies to. That's something that needed to be done to make sure that the shira was done properly. But the appointment was for shira bapeh, ki ikar shira bapeh. So therefore the concept of zarut, the concept of being a non-Levi and therefore invalid, only applies to shira bapeh because that's what the Levi was appointed for. But the concept of musical accompaniment, that wasn't, that's something that was needed to be done, but not something that defined the person of the Levi. Now, here's the words of the Ritva that really seems to support this. De lo kari mishorarim stam de mikdash, ela lamashmiya kol b'halel v'odot l'Hashem. The mishorarim, the singers, were the ones that were calling out in praise and thanks to Hashem, v'lo lamachzikim b'kli shir, and not the ones that were holding the musical instruments. Alma ike shira b'pehu, the main shira. Apparently, the main shira is through singing in the mouth. V'hem aroim likarei mishorarim de mikdash. They're the ones who are called mishorarim in the mikdash. You see how he's focusing on the identity of the person. That the whole question of ikar shira b'kli or ikar shira b'peh, who is defined as the mishorer? And then what's going to follow is those are the ones that need to be a Levi. You need to be a Levi for. So now, that a non-Levi can do musical accompaniment, we have a good explanation for. What about Shabbos? So Shabbos works in a different way, says Rav Soloveitchik. In order to push aside Shabbat in the Beis Hamikdash, you don't need an avoda, something. You need something that's essential to be done. For instance, Shchita is done on Shabbos for Korbanos, even though Shchita is permitted to be done by a Zar explicitly. cutting the omer pushes aside Shabbos, according to the Rambam, as a mitzvah, not because it's part of a necessary preparation for bringing it, because the Rambam himself paskin that if it was cut during the day before Shabbos, it would be kosher. Even though the katsira isn't considered, the cutting of the omer isn't considered avoda, it could be done by a non-Kohen. So this is a whole different category now. So it turns out that there's a difference between Techias Shabbos and Zarus. Zarus is dependent on, for Haleviim, is dependent on you weren't appointed for that avoda. Who's a mishorer? A singer. A musician is not defined as a mishorer. That's not part of his person definition, and therefore the concept of zarus doesn't apply to him. However, Techias Shabbos, pushing off Shabbos is dependent on chalus shem korban v'harkrava, something that's defined as a korban, something that's defined as part of. So, kol shu kiyum begufo shel korban tzibur, anything that is, it is a fulfillment of a public korban, doches HaShabbos. Therefore, even Shrita and even Ksiras HaOmer does. Mikevan Shekain, therefore, Muvan Etev, it's very understandable, Lama Shira Dochaz HaShabbos Afal Pishenu Mechlal Avodas Haleviim. Even though Levim aren't the ones that, excuse me, that do the musical accompaniment, but the musical accompaniment is still Dochaz Shabbos. Shira al korbanos ena chova miyucheres bifnei atzma. It's not an independent chova. Hi mahava kiyum begufo shel korban of a kiyum havaso. It's a fulfillment in the korban and the bringing of the korban. So it comes out that the Rambam is not contradicting himself. Simply, these two areas of pushing aside Shabbos and does it have to be done by a Levi are working with different sets of rules. We paskin ikar shira bapeh, but because musical accompaniment is also an essential part of the korban, albeit a complementary part, it's Dochas Shabbos. On the other hand, it doesn't have to be done by Levim because the whole Avodas Haleviim works through appointment and doing what you're appointed to do. Levim were appointed to be Meshorim, to be singers. And therefore, a non-Levi can't be a singer. A musical accompanier, as essential as it is, it's not something that minui applies to, that defines the person in his self. Those people that were the musicians, halachically, they're not categorized as the musicians. They're doing an act of musical accompaniment, but the Meshorim were defined as singers. That's their identity, and anybody who's not defined as a Meshorah can't do it. It's only for Levim. So, whereas pushing off Shabbos is connected with, is this a part of the korban? Is this a part of the korban that needs to be done? Musical accompaniment is, and therefore, fine. Now, I'd like to add, now that we have a little time, one more development. There seemed to be, and this he in this section of the the article he develops, there seem to be 3 different types of singing in the Beis Hamikdash. We find that there's more singing other than just the singing when the Korban Tamid or the Korban Musaf were being offered. We have a principle of Ein Omrim Shira Lo Yayin, that the Shira is only done, the singing of the Haleviim is only done when the wine is being libated. But we see that that's not the case in a complete way. That's only applying to the Shira that is done along with the offering of the Korban Tamid and the Korban Musaf. However, we find there's more singing in the Beis Hamikdash. For instance, singing when the Korban Pesach was being shechted. Singing when the Korban Pesach was being shechted, no wine is libated for the Korban Pesach. So it can't be that that's a standard kind of shira of that we about which we would say Ein Omrim Shira Lo Yayin. It's not the kind of shira that is learned out from Visheris B'Shem Hashem Elokav, you will serve in the name of Hashem. Rather, that's learned out from Hallelu, the last Mizbar of Hallelujah, the last Hallelujah. So there, the Haluka, Alu Kel Bekacho, Alu Bekirozo, Alu Bekirosav, Alu Kurov Gulo, Alu Beseka Shofar, Alu Beneva Vachinor, Alu Besof Machol. That's where all the musicians, the music is mentioned. So that second Mechayev, that second obligation, is the source of a lot of different kinds of shira that take place in the Beis Hamikdash. For instance, besides the Korban, when the Korban Pesach was being shechted, when they would put up the aravos on the Mizbeach, these giant willow branches, so it says they would blow the shofar, they would blow the chatzotzros, token and marim betoken, they would blow, do tkiya through a tkiya, and Tosaf says that's mishum simcha, joy. When they would open the gates, there would be 9 blowings. When they would blow the shofar on Rosh Hashanah, it was accompanied by the chatzotzros, the trumpets. Simchas Beis HaShoeva, they would sing, and there was musical accompaniment. That's the Mishnah, HaChalil. However, there's a difference between which are Docha Shabbos or not. Those that are connected with the Korban are Docha Shabbos. Not only the Shira with musical accompaniment that was done when they libated the wine, which is the main Shira that we've been speaking about up until now, but even the Shir on a Korban, even the song on a Korban, like the one that was involved with the shechting and the Korban Pesach, that also is Docha Shabbos. And so when Erev Pesach would come out on Shabbos, they would still do the Shira. That Shira was still Docha Shabbos. But the Simchas Beis HaShoeva, which is not connected to a Korban at all, that wasn't Docha Shabbos, and that's the Mishnah. Anyway, so that is only one component of a large article by Rav Soloveitchik. There's beautiful material in the second half of that article, but we only related to 10 pages somewhere in the middle of that article. So the Rambam's Piskei Halacha are not contradictory. The Rambam does paskin ikar shira b'peh, that the main shira is in singing. That is the main avodas Haleviim. That's what defines them as mishorerim, as singers. And anyone who's not a Levi can't do that. The Yisraelim could do musical accompaniment. However, when it comes to pushing off Shabbos, anything that's part of the Korban pushes off Shabbos. So the musical accompaniment, because it's an essential complement to the singing, it's also Docha Shabbos, because Tchiyah Shabbos is not dependent on what the main avoda is. So, on the one hand, it could be done by non-Levim. On the other hand, it is Docha Shabbos. What else is Docha Shabbos in Shira? Anything connected with the Korban. Even non-classical Shira, non-Vesheris V'Shem Elokav Shira, but the Haluka El B'Kodsho Shira, which is associated though with the Korban. Simchas Beis HaShoeva Shira, that's not associated with the Korban and therefore is not Docha Shabbos. So that's what I wanted to share with you from Rav Soloveitchik's article. Okay, good question about the musical instruments. What if a string breaks? So that would be the test case. What if a string breaks, where that would be not only a rabbinic but a biblical? I'm almost sure that is related to here, but in general we say Ein Shvus B'Mikdash. Right, but I'm almost sure I'm missing a piece of information because there's a Tosfos that discusses your issue, if I'm not mistaken, and it might be the one in Sukkah. My apology, but I think that your issue is dealt with directly.
Directly, okay.
Directly, yeah. So Bli Neder, I'll dig it up.
Docha Shabbat means Doraisa, correct?
Right. So I owe you one, Bli Neder.